If only they knew what the king's laughter meant, they would have fled the palace that night. But instead they stood outside his chamber, listening to him laugh and laugh, until the sound became something else entirely. Something hollow and wrong like wind rushing through an empty skull. King Adim had not laughed in 3 years, not since the great sickness took his first wife and left him alone with grief. Now suddenly he laughed every night without stopping. His voice echoed through the stone corridors, making the servants shiver and cover their ears. The royal advisor Baba Kalu stood by the door with his hands folded. He looked worried. The other courtiers whispered among themselves, trying to understand what had changed. Then one of them spoke quietly. It started after he met that woman Noma, the storyteller from the river. Yes, another replied. She came to the market 3 days ago. Since then the king has not been himself. The laughter grew louder. It did not sound like joy. It sounded like someone drowning in air, gasping and choking on something invisible. Then suddenly a young servant burst through the door, his eyes wide with terror. He was shaking as he screamed. The king's shadow. His shadow has vanished from the wall. Noma arrived in the village on a morning when the mist was still thick over the river. Nobody knew where she came from. She simply appeared at the market square, carrying a wooden box filled with small clay dolls. The villagers gathered around her, curious and amused. She smiled warmly and began to speak. Her voice was soft like honey poured slowly from a jar. I am Noma, she said. I tell stories with my little friends here. She lifted one of the clay dolls. It was shaped like a fat man with a big belly. She held it close to her mouth and whispered something. Then suddenly the doll spoke in a deep voice that sounded exactly like Chief Ogre the village head. Where is my food? The doll said. I am hungry. The crowd burst into laughter. Chief Ogre himself was standing there, and even he laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Noma performed for hours. Her dolls mimicked voices perfectly. The children loved her. The adults clapped and cheered. But then one small boy laughed too hard. He fell to his knees, holding his stomach, tears streaming down his face. And suddenly one of Noma's clay dolls cracked in half. The boy opened his mouth to speak. No sound came out. That evening the elders gathered in the village square. They sat under the ancient Irako tree, where all important matters were discussed. Baba Kalu, the royal advisor, stood in the center, holding a staff carved with symbols of protection. He cleared his throat and spoke slowly. Many years ago, he began the great oracle of the river came to this land. She spoke a prophecy about our king. She said, he shall marry a fool, or doom shall walk the land. The elders nodded. They remembered the prophecy well. It had been spoken when King Adim was still a boy. We thought it was a riddle, Baba Kalu continued. We thought it meant the king must marry a simple woman, a humble woman, someone without pride. But now one elder interrupted. What if the prophecy is about this Noma, the storyteller? Another elder agreed. She is strange. She is a fool in her own way. Maybe the spirits sent her to save us. Baba Kalu was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. If that is true, he said, then she must be the one. We must prepare her for the king. We must bring her to the palace before the next full moon. The elders agreed. None of them noticed a shadow moving behind the Irako tree, listening to every word. Tari was a quiet young man who worked as the king's scribe. His job was to copy the king's letters and keep records of all the important decisions made in the palace. He loved his work because it kept him close to truth and far from the noise of politics. But lately something strange had been happening. The king's handwriting was changing. Tari sat in his small room, staring at the parchment in front of him. The king's letters, which were once neat and straight, now bent and curved like river waves. Some of the words looked more like drawings than writing. He flipped through older documents, comparing them. The change had started 3 days ago, the same day Noma arrived in the village. Tari's hands trembled as he reached the last page. At the bottom, instead of the king's signature, there was something else. A name written in thin, crooked letters. The river's mouth. Tari stood up quickly, his heart pounding. He looked around his room as if someone might be watching. Then he folded the parchment carefully and hid it under his mat. He did not know what it meant yet, but he knew it was not good. The palace held a great feast to celebrate Noma's first performance for the king. The grand hall was filled with nobles, chiefs, and merchants, all dressed in their finest clothes. Long tables were covered with roasted meats, fried plantains, and jugs of palm wine. Noma stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by her clay dolls. She wore a simple white wrapper, and her hair was decorated with cowrie shells. She looked beautiful and strange at the same time. The king sat on his throne watching her with wide, unblinking eyes. He had not smiled all evening, but when Noma began to speak, his face changed. She told a story about a river that swallowed the sun. Her voice rose and fell like music. The clay dolls danced in her hands, mimicking the voices of gods and spirits. Then the king laughed. It was a loud, sudden laugh that echoed through the hall. And at that exact moment, one of the tall candles near the throne went out. Nobody noticed at first. Noma continued her story. The king laughed again. Another candle died. Tari, who was standing near the wall, watching everything, counted the candles. There were 12 burning at the start of the feast. Now there were only 2 left. The king laughed once more. The last candle went out. In the darkness, Noma's eyes glowed faintly blue. The next morning, Tari was sweeping the courtyard when he saw something shining in the dirt near the fountain. He bent down and picked it up. It was a bangle made of bronze carved with intricate patterns. On one side was a royal crest, the symbol of King Adim's family. On the other side was a strange sigil that looked like waves, or maybe a serpent coiled in a circle. Tari recognized it immediately. He had seen Noma wearing it during the feast. He held the bangle up to the light, examining it closely. It felt cold, much colder than it should be. He tried to put it down, but something stopped him. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper. He walked to the well and held the bangle near the water. Immediately, he heard whispering. It was faint like voices carried on wind, but he could make out words. Laughter takes breath, takes voice, takes life. Tari dropped the bangle in shock. But when he looked down, it was no longer on the ground. It was on his wrist. He pulled at it frantically, trying to remove it. But the bangle tightened, squeezing his skin until it hurt. Tari gasped in pain and fear. The whispering grew louder. Tari ran through the village, holding his wrist, the bangle burning cold against his skin. He did not know where to go or who to trust. Then he remembered Mama Oru, the blind priestess who lived at the edge of the forest. Everyone said she could see things others could not. He found her sitting outside her small hut, weaving a basket. Her eyes were covered with a white cloth, but she turned her head toward him as if she could see him clearly. "You carry something that does not belong to you," she said before he could speak. Tari stopped breathing. "How did you know?" Mama Oru smiled sadly. "I can feel it, boy. That thing on your wrist is not just a bangle. It is a chain." She reached out her hand. Tari hesitated, then stepped closer. She touched the bangle gently and immediately pulled her hand back as if burned. "Laughter that steals breath is not joy," she whispered. "It is a curse." Tari's voice shook. "What do I do? How do I stop it?" Mama Oru was silent for a long time. Then she spoke slowly, her voice heavy with warning. "The prophecy was misread, boy. She is not the fool the king must marry." She paused. "She is the fool he must unmask." That night Tari could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same vision. A river flowing under a moonless sky. The water was black and thick like oil. And from somewhere deep beneath the surface, he heard laughter. It sounded like a woman's voice. The river laughed louder and louder until it began to rise, swallowing trees and rocks, and finally the moon itself. The sky went dark. The laughter echoed everywhere. Tari tried to run, but his feet were stuck in mud. He looked down and saw hands, pale and wet, reaching up from the ground, grabbing his ankles, pulling him down. He screamed and woke up gasping for air. His room was silent. The moonlight came through the window, casting shadows on the walls. Everything seemed normal. Then Tari noticed something. The floor near his mat was wet. He sat up slowly, his heart pounding. He touched the water with his fingers. It was cold, real, but it had not rained that night. Tari stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the village was quiet and dry. No puddles, no storm. He looked down at the floor again. The water was spreading slowly, creeping toward his feet. And from somewhere far away, he heard it again. Laughter. The next day, King Adim made a shocking announcement. He stood in the throne room surrounded by his advisors and guards, his voice loud and clear. Noma is my medicine of joy, he declared. She has brought light back into my heart. From this day forward, no one is allowed to speak ill of her. Anyone who does will be punished. The nobles exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to argue. Tari stood at the back of the room, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to shout to tell everyone what he had seen and heard, but fear held his tongue. After the announcement, Tari approached Baba Kalu, the royal advisor. He pulled him aside and whispered urgently, "Baba Kalu, please listen. There is something wrong with Noma. The bangle, the laughter, the voices I heard. She is cursed. The king is in danger." Baba Kalu's face hardened. He looked at Tari with cold eyes. "You are speaking madness, boy. The king has chosen her. That is final. But Baba Kalu, please." "Enough." Before Tari could say another word, 2 palace guards appeared behind him. They grabbed his arms roughly. "What are you doing?" Tari shouted, struggling. Baba Kalu turned away. "Take him to the dungeon. He has mocked the king's chosen." Tari's heart sank as they dragged him away. The dungeon was a dark, cold place beneath the palace. The walls were damp and covered with moss. The only light came from a small torch burning far down the corridor. Tari sat on the stone floor, his wrists still bound. His mind raced. How could they not see it? How could they ignore all the signs? Then he heard something. Voices. At first he thought it was the guards talking. But as he listened closer, he realized the voices were coming from the walls. Faint echoes repeating the same word over and over. "Fool! Fool! Fool!" Tari pressed his hands against his ears, but the voices grew louder. "Fool! Fool! Fool!" Suddenly the voices stopped. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Tari looked up expecting to see a guard, but instead he saw someone else. Mama Oru. She stood outside, his cellar blind eyes covered with the white cloth. She was calm, as if walking through a dungeon in the middle of the night was the most natural thing in the world. Tari stood up quickly. "Mama Oru, how did you get in here?" "The dungeon is sealed. No one can enter without the guards knowing." Mama Oru smiled gently. "Some doors, boy, are not locked by men." Mama Oru sat down slowly on the ground outside Tari's cell. Her voice was soft but serious. "Listen carefully, boy. What you are facing is older than this kingdom, older than the king himself." Tari leaned closer, pressing his face against the bars. "There's a place," Mama Oru continued, "called the River of Lost Tongues. It is not a river you can see on any map. It flows beneath the earth, fed by the tears and voices of those who died with words still trapped in their throats." Tari felt a chill run down his spine. Long ago, Mama Oru said a priestess made a bargain with the river. She wanted power. She wanted to be remembered. So the river gave her a gift. Laughter. But laughter is not free, she added. Every time someone laughs because of the priestess's magic, the river takes something in return. Their voice, their breath, their life. Tari's hands tightened around the bars. "And Noma?" Mama Ora nodded slowly. "Noma carries that curse now. She is not evil, boy. She is trapped." Tari's voice shook. "How we break it?" Mama Ora looked at him with her blind eyes, as if she could see straight into his soul. "To break it," she said, "the fool must weep." Mama Ora disappeared as quietly as she had come, leaving Tari alone in the cell. But her words stayed with him, burning in his mind. The fool must weep. The next morning Tari was released. Baba Kalu said nothing, only that the king had shown mercy. Tari did not trust it, but he did not argue. That evening he followed Noma. She left the palace just before sunset, walking alone toward the forest. Tari stayed far behind, hiding behind trees and rocks, careful not to make a sound. Noma walked for a long time until she reached a clearing deep in the forest. In the center of the clearing was a shrine made of stones and clay. Dozens of small clay dolls were arranged in a circle around it. Tari crouched behind a bush watching. Noma knelt before the shrine. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Soon I'll be free. Soon this will end." Her voice was filled with sadness. Tari felt a pang of pity. But then something happened that made his blood run cold. One of the clay dolls, the one shaped like a child, turned its head slowly and looked directly at him. Tari froze. His heart pounded in his chest. The doll's eyes were hollow, but they seemed to see everything. Noma did not move. She kept whispering her prayers. But the doll smiled. Tari ran back to the palace, his mind spinning with fear and confusion. He could not sleep that night. He kept seeing the doll smile in his mind. The next day, he decided to search for answers. He went to the village healer, an old woman named Adim, who kept records of sicknesses and deaths. Adim, he said, I need to know about the people who watched Noma's performances. The ones who laughed. What happened to them? Adim frowned. She pulled out a tattered notebook and flipped through the pages. Strange you ask, she said. Many of them have fallen ill. Some have lost their voices completely. Others have grown weak, as if something is draining them slowly. Tari felt his stomach twist. How many? 12 so far. Tari's hands trembled. Do you remember the first one? The very first person who got sick after watching Noma? Adim nodded. Yes, a woman. She died 2 weeks ago. Tari leaned forward. What was her name? Adim looked at him with sad eyes. Her name was Adana. She was Noma's mother. Tari's breath caught in his throat. Everything suddenly made sense. The curse, the river, the clay dolls. Noma was the first victim. Tari found Mama Oru again that night. He told her everything the shrine, the clay dolls, Noma's mother. Mama Oru listened carefully. Then she nodded. We must act quickly, she said. There's a ritual. It requires fire and sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Tari asked. Mama Oru pointed at his wrist. The bangle. Tari looked down. The bronze bangle was still there, cold and tight against the skin. If we burn it, Mama Oru said, we may weaken the curse. It will not break it completely, but it will give us time. Tari hesitated. Then he nodded. Let's do it. They built a small fire in the forest. Mama Oru chanted prayers in a language Tari did not understand. Then she told him to hold his wrist over the flames. Tari grit his teeth and obeyed. The heat was unbearable. The bangle began to glow red, then white. Suddenly it melted. Tari gasped in relief. The bangle dripped into the fire, turning to liquid bronze. But then the fire went out, and when Tari looked down at his wrist, the bangle was back. Solid. Oh, colder than before. Mama Oru's face went pale. The whispering returned, louder this time. Burning cannot silence water. Tari's hope shattered. That night the sky turned red. Rain began to fall, but it was not water. It was thick, dark red like blood. The villagers screamed and ran for shelter. The streets turned crimson. Every puddle reflected the same image. Noma's smiling face. Tari stood in the courtyard staring up at the sky. His clothes were soaked. The red rain dripped from his hair into his eyes. This is it, he whispered. The curse is spreading. Inside the palace, King Adim stood at his window, watching the rain. His face was calm. Too calm. Then he turned to Baba Kalu and spoke. Prepare the wedding. It will take place at sunrise. Baba Kalu's eyes widened. Your Majesty, the rain, the people are frightened. Perhaps we should wait. No, the king interrupted. The prophecy must be fulfilled. I will marry Noma tomorrow. Baba Kalu bowed his head. As you wish, my king. Outside, Tari heard the announcement. His heart sank. He had one night to stop the curse. One night to save the king. But he did not know how. The red rain fell harder. And somewhere in the distance, Noma laughed. Tari ran through the palace, searching for anything that could help. He burst into the king's private chamber, hoping to find clues. The room was empty, except for a large mirror on the wall. Tari walked toward it slowly. His reflection stared back tired and desperate. Then something changed. In the mirror behind his reflection, he saw someone else. Noma, but she looked different. Younger, a child. Her hair was wet, and her eyes were filled with tears. She looked drowned. Tari spun around. No one was there. He turned back to the mirror. The child was still there staring at him. Help me, she whispered. Tari's throat tightened. Who are you? I am Noma, the real Noma, the one who drowned. Tari's mind raced. What happened to you? The child began to cry. My mother offered me to the river. She said it would end the drought. But I was just a child. Tari's heart broke. Suddenly the reflection reached out. Her hand pressed against the glass from inside. Then it pushed through. Tari stumbled backward as the child's wet cold hand grabbed his. "Save me," she whispered. The next morning the village woke to silence. The red rain had stopped, but something worse had happened. The market, always loud with merchants and children, was now completely quiet. People moved like ghosts. They opened their mouths to speak, but no sound came out. Every voice was gone. Every voice except one. Noma's laughter. It echoed through the streets, bouncing off walls, filling the air. It was the only sound left. Tari walked through the market, his heart heavy. He saw mothers trying to call their children, traders trying to sell goods, but no one could speak. He found Mama Oru sitting outside her hut. She looked weaker. Her hands were shaking. "Mama Oru," Tari whispered, kneeling beside her. She opened her mouth, but only breath came out. She grabbed his hand and squeezed tightly. Then she pointed toward the forest. Her lips moved slowly, forming words without sound. "Find the river's cradle. Before dawn." Tari nodded. He understood. Mama Oru's eyes closed. Her hand went limp. Tari's vision blurred with tears. He stood up. He had no time to grieve. He had to find the river's cradle. Tari ran into the forest, following the path Noma had taken. He moved quickly, jumping over roots and ducking under branches. The sun was setting. He had maybe 2 hours. Finally, he reached the clearing. But this time he did not stop at the shrine. He kept going deeper, following the sound of running water. Then he found it, a small hidden pool surrounded by ancient stones. The water was black and still. Carved into the largest stone were words in an old language. Tari knelt and traced the letters with his fingers. He could barely read them, but recognized a few words. One laughter, one life. This was it, the river's cradle, where the curse began. Tari's heart pounded. He looked around. The forest was silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. Then the water began to move. Ripples formed in the center. Slowly something rose from the depths. A voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper on wind. But then it grew louder. It was calling his name. "Tari, Tari, Tari." He stepped back, fear gripping his chest. The water whispered again. "You cannot save her. You are too late." Tari turned and saw Noma at the edge of the clearing. She was not smiling. Her face was pale and her eyes were red. "You shouldn't have come here," she said quietly. Tari stood slowly. "I know the truth, Noma. I know what happened." Noma's hands trembled. She wrapped her arms around herself as if cold. "You don't know anything," she whispered. Tari stepped closer. "Your mother sacrificed you to the river. She thought it would save the village, but it cursed you instead." Noma's face crumpled. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't want this," she cried. "I was just a child. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Tari's voice was gentle. "Then why are you doing this? Why let the curse continue?" Noma shook her head violently. "I can't stop it. The spirit controls me. Every time I laugh, someone loses their voice. I don't want to harm the king, but it won't let me stop." She fell to her knees sobbing. Tari knelt beside her. "There has to be a way." "Mama Oru said you have to weep." Real tears. Noma looked up, her face filled with pain. "I've been weeping for years," she whispered. Tari stayed with Noma by the river's cradle. He told her stories about her mother, about how Adana spent her last years searching for a way to bring Noma back, how she died whispering Noma's name. Noma listened, her eyes filled with sadness. Then finally she wept. Her tears fell slowly, dropping onto stones. Tari watched them carefully, hoping this would break the curse. But when the tears hit the ground, they did not disappear. They turned into pearls. Small white pearls that rolled across the stones into the water. Tari's heart sank. The curse held. Noma looked at the pearls and laughed bitterly. "Even my tears are not my own." Suddenly they heard it. Drums. The wedding drums were starting. Noma stood slowly. Her face was calm now, resigned. "When he laughs, once more," she whispered, "I will vanish. The river will take me back. The curse will move to someone else." Tari grabbed her arm. "No, there has to be another way." Noma smiled sadly. "There isn't. She pulled away and began walking back toward the village. Tari followed his mind, racing, trying to think of anything that could stop this. But he had nothing. The wedding ceremony was held in the palace courtyard. The nobles and chiefs stood in rows dressed in their finest. But no one spoke. No one could. King Adim stood at the altar, wearing royal robes. His face was expressionless. His eyes were empty. Noma walked slowly down the aisle. She wore a white wrapper decorated with gold beads. She looked beautiful, but her eyes were filled with sadness. The priest began the ceremony, the only voice left. He chanted prayers and blessings. Then he told the king to laugh as a sign of joy. King Adim smiled. Then he laughed. It was a loud, echoing laugh that filled the courtyard. And at that moment his hair turned white. All of it. In seconds his black hair became snow white. The crowd gasped silently, their eyes wide with horror. Tari pushed through the crowd. He ran toward the altar shouting, "Stop!" She was the first victim. Noma is not the fool you must marry. She is the fool you must free. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. King Adim stopped laughing. His white hair fell over his face. He looked at Noma, and for the first time he saw the truth. The ground began to shake. Water burst from cracks in the courtyard stones, shooting into the air. The nobles screamed and ran. The guards tried to hold positions, but the water was too strong. Noma stood still in the center. Her shadow began to grow, stretching across the ground, becoming darker and larger. Then the shadow rose. It formed the shape of a woman, but taller and more terrible. Her hair flowed like water. Her eyes glowed blue. Her mouth revealed rows of sharp teeth. This was the river spirit. She looked down at the crowd and laughed. The same laugh that had echoed through the village for days. King Adim stumbled backward, his face pale. Tari ran toward Noma, but before he could reach her, Mama Oru appeared. She was weak, barely able to stand, but she held a staff carved with ancient symbols. She began to chant. Her voice was soft at first, but grew stronger. The words were old, powerful, filled with authority. The river spirit screamed. She thrashed and twisted, trying to break free. But then Mama Oru's voice began to fade. She collapsed. The chant stopped. The spirit laughed again, louder. Tari's heart pounded. He looked at Mama Oru, then at Noma, then at the dying village. He had to finish the ritual. Tari picked up the staff. He did not know the words. He did not know the language. But he remembered the rhythm. He remembered the sound. He began to chant. His voice was shaky at first, but he pushed through. He repeated the words, copying the tone, the cadence, the power. The river spirit turned toward him. Her glowing eyes locked onto his. "You," she hissed. "You have no power here." Tari kept chanting. The bangle on his wrist began to glow. It grew hot, burning his skin. He gritted his teeth and kept going. The spirit screamed. She lunged toward him, but the staff's light pushed her back. Tari felt something draining from him. His strength, his breath. The bangle was taking it all. He fell to his knees, still chanting. His vision blurred. His voice grew weaker. The spirit laughed. "You will die before you finish." Tari looked at Noma. She was watching him, tears streaming down her face. He smiled and kept chanting. The spirit screamed again. Her form began to flicker. Then she spoke in a voice filled with rage. "Only her tears can end me. Only her tears." Tari stopped chanting. He looked at Noma. He knew what to do. Tari dropped the staff. He walked slowly toward Noma, ignoring the spirit's screams. He knelt in front of her and took her hands. "Noma," he said softly, "I need to tell you something your mother wanted you to know." Noma's eyes were filled with pain. "What?" Tari took a deep breath. "Your mother regretted it. Every single day. She spent years trying to undo what she did. She went to every priestess, every healer, every oracle. She searched everywhere." Noma's lips trembled. "And on the day she died," Tari continued, "she whispered your name. She said, 'I'm sorry, Noma. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.'" Noma's face crumpled. She began to sob. But this time her tears were different. They did not turn into pearls. They fell as water. Real tears. The moment they touched the ground, the river spirit screamed. Her form began to dissolve. The water that had flooded the courtyard started to recede. Noma's body began to fade. She looked at Tari and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for setting me free." Her laughter echoed one last time, but this time it was not the curse. It was joy. Then she turned into mist and disappeared. The silence was complete. The water receded, slowly sinking back into the earth. The courtyard was left wet and quiet. The villagers stood frozen, unsure if it was over. Then someone coughed. Then someone else spoke. The voices returned. One by one, the people began to talk, to shout, to cry with relief. The curse was broken. King Adim stood at the altar, his white hair gleaming in sunlight. He looked down at his hands, then at the empty space where Noma had stood. Then he laughed. But this time it was not the hollow, terrible laugh of before. It was real, filled with grief and relief and understanding. Tari collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The bangle on his wrist cracked. Then it fell off, turning to dust. Mama Oru crawled toward him. She was weak but alive. She touched his shoulder gently. "You did well, boy," she whispered. Tari smiled. The sun rose fully over the palace. The kingdom was saved. Mama Oru looked out at the crowd. Then she spoke, quietly so only Tari could hear. If only they knew the fool was never her. The fool was every heart that mistook laughter for truth. Tari nodded. He understood now. The river was quiet, and the king finally wept.